Westminster Abbey, 6th of May, 2023, and a woman waits inside a rite older than the country conducting it. Within the hour, the Archbishop of Canterbury will pour consecrated oil onto her head and lower a crown after it, while the congregation watches a ceremony that predates Parliament and every legal argument anyone ever raised about whether she belonged in the building at all. She attends as nobody's guest. The service names her in her own right, under her own name, as Queen Camilla. 30 years before that morning, British newspapers printed the full transcript of a private telephone call between this woman and the man now seated a few feet from her. For the rest of that decade, the tabloid press worked her over as a marriage wrecker and a national intruder, and disapproval ran high enough that her own advisors kept her clear of cameras for years at a stretch. Now the Church of England crowns her. The popular account of that journey runs as a love triangle, with a prince, a princess, and the other woman, and casting that clean fits on a front page, which explains why it survives. What sits in the documented record moves slower. A set of unwritten marriage rules disqualified Camilla before anything began. A press operation ran out of a royal household under a named official. With a name strategy, a hobbyist pulled a recording out of open radio traffic, lawyers fought over whether the wedding carried any legal force at all, and a promise about her title went out to the public that nobody involved possessed the power to keep. None of that amounts to a romance with a villain in it. An institutional system produced this story, chewing through 3 marriages and scattering casualties across every side of the situation it existed to manage. Whether that system produced a queen at the end of it or merely absorbed one is a question Britain has still not settled, 3 decades of polling and 4 competing biographies notwithstanding. Rewind to 1970, when Charles and Camilla Shand met through a mutual friend, Lucia Santa Cruz, though some accounts pushed the first encounter to a polo match at Windsor Great Park the following year. That vagueness carries its own information. The opening scene of a relationship destined to outlast 2 marriages and rearrange the top of the British monarchy survives in 2 competing versions, because nobody present at the time judged it worth recording precisely. They date briefly. He ships out for active service with the Royal Navy in 1971, and by 1972, the thing has run its course. The machine reveals itself early, and it reveals itself as a list of conditions. Mid-century royal protocol, braced by aristocratic convention, held that the heir to the throne should marry a woman of aristocratic lineage who appeared to be a virgin and who arrived carrying no prior romantic history attached to her name. No statute set this down, and nobody could produce a signed document on request. The expectation simply carried enough weight that everybody inside the system behaved as though it bound them, which in practice bound them completely. Camilla Shand failed the list. Not on character, not on suitability, not on anything a person might correct through effort, but on conditions drafted before her birth and enforced by people who would never once have to defend them in public. Sally Bedell Smith, writing about all of this decades later, traces the origin of the entire disaster to precisely this point, to archaic rules from the 1970s that blocked the compatible marriage, rather than to the malice of any individual involved. Nobody at the time called it a disaster, because at the time it looked like ordinary housekeeping. Sit with the consequence, because it produces one of the colder ironies in modern British public life. The institution that would spend the 1990s watching its heir flayed in print for adultery had personally arranged, 20 years earlier, the conditions that guaranteed the adultery. Then it spent 3 further decades managing the fallout. Nobody inside it ever conceded the connection. On the 4th of July, 1973, Camilla Shand marries a British Army officer named Andrew Parker Bowles in a Roman Catholic ceremony at the Guards Chapel, Wellington Barracks. A garrison chapel, a soldier's guest list, and a wedding of a kind that would ordinarily leave no public trace whatsoever. Respectable and conventional. The British public had no reason yet to learn her name, and for another 19 years, most of the country never would. 8 years later, on the 29th of July, 1981, Prince Charles marries Lady Diana Spencer at St. Paul's Cathedral in a ceremony broadcast around the world. Diana satisfied the specification in every column: aristocratic lineage, no printable romantic history, young enough for the press to construct her from scratch, photogenic enough that the construction sold at volume, and willing. Compatibility never entered the specification. The institution answered by putting the result on television for a global audience, a decision it would come to regret at leisure. 2 weddings, 8 years apart, both of them output from the same set of rules. Camilla married the man she was allowed to marry, while Charles married the woman the institution required him to marry, in front of more witnesses than any wedding in British history to that point. One question occupied British public life for most of a decade, and it still splits the biographies open. When did the affair restart? Jonathan Dimbleby's authorized biography, published in 1994, places the resumption of the physical relationship in 1986, after the marriage to Diana had broken down irretrievably, and that date does not sit in the book as a stray detail. Establish that the marriage collapsed first, and the affair converts from cause into consequence. Dimbleby's Charles emerges as a sensitive and duty-bound man trapped in an emotionally barren household, raised by cold parents with Prince Philip drawing particular fire, while Camilla supplies the only warmth anywhere in the frame. Penny Junor pushes further in the same direction. Across books published in 1998 and 2017, Camilla never sought royal status at all, acted out of affection during a stretch of isolation in Charles's life, and absorbed years of press abuse in silence, while Diana's handling of the media cast her as a malicious temptress. Bedell Smith complicates the chronology without demolishing it, holding that the bond between Charles and Camilla never truly dissolved, and that by 1986 both Charles and Diana looked for solace outside the marriage. Her tragedy belongs to the 1970s rules. Then Tom Bauer publishes Rebel Prince in 2018 and detonates the lot, describing a petulant and self-indulgent prince alongside a Camilla maneuvering shrewdly towards status and title, with allegations that she and the household's public relations chief orchestrated media leaks against other members of the family. Andrew Morton's book had already argued, with Diana behind it, that Camilla operated as a continuous presence from the start of the marriage rather than arriving late to its wreckage. 4 writers with the deepest access describe 4 different women, and no member of the public possesses any instrument capable of choosing between them. That absence sits underneath every strong opinion Britain has held about Camilla since 1992. Pick your author, pick your Camilla. Everything after this point runs on evidence of a harder kind: transcripts, statutes, Hansard, polling, and dates nobody disputes. June 1992, and Andrew Morton published Diana, Her True Story, written with Diana's secret collaboration. The relationship between Charles and Camilla enters public view, carrying the authority of the wife's own account behind it, which no tabloid rumor of the previous decade had ever managed. Sales followed accordingly. The secret collaboration matters more than anything the book revealed. A serving Princess of Wales opened a private channel to a journalist and turned a commercially published biography into an instrument aimed at her husband's reputation, which tells you the marriage had stopped functioning as a marriage sometime earlier and converted into a media conflict with 2 staffed sides. Nobody in the country understood that in 1992. Readers absorbed the book as testimony from a trapped woman, which it also plainly was, and the strategic dimension surfaced only years later, once the collaboration came to light. 6 months after publication, the fight arrived, somewhere nobody could pretend it belonged. On the 9th of December, 1992, Prime Minister John Major rose in the House of Commons and informed Parliament that the Prince and Princess of Wales would separate amicably by agreement. Consider the mechanics of that afternoon. The head of government interrupted the parliamentary day to read the collapse of a marriage into Hansard, where the words remain permanently, filed alongside budget statements and questions about fisheries policy. No member present could dismiss the separation as a private matter, because the succession attached to it, the Church of England attached to it, and behind both of those sat the Crown itself. Parliament handled a bedroom because the Constitution left it nowhere else to put one. The words selected for the official record, amicably, demanded a certain flexibility from everyone in the chamber, and it would demand considerably more within a month. January 1993, and British newspapers, led by The People and the Sunday Mirror, print full transcripts of an intimate, sexually explicit telephone conversation between Charles and Camilla. The call itself occurred in December 1989. For 3 years, the recording existed on tape somewhere in the country, waiting for a buyer, a moment, or a nerve. And when it finally surfaced, it landed 1 month after the Prime Minister's statement to the Commons. The interception proved almost aggressively unglamorous. Cyril Reenan, an amateur radio scanner hobbyist, plucked the conversation out of the air, because analog cellular signals in 1989 traveled as unencrypted radio that anybody with a suitable receiver and enough patience could pull down at home. No infiltration or professional espionage was required. The heir to the British throne conducted an intimate private conversation over a technology that functioned, in practice, as an open broadcast to anybody within range who cared to listen. Tabloid conspiracy theorizing rushed into the space anyway. With rampant speculation, the British intelligence conducted systematic surveillance of the royal family and leaked what it collected. Nobody ever verified any of that. The speculation belongs in the category of rumor rather than record, though its popularity repays a second look, because a great many people found a secret state surveillance program easier to believe than a retired man with a scanner in spare time. Whatever route the tape traveled, the effect on the institution proved total. Two people talking privately, printed word for word, available at every newsagent in Britain, with the dignity of a monarchy older than the printing press attached to every line on the page. Diana deployed a book against her husband, and Charles, intending nothing of the kind, supplied a transcript against himself. Across the 1990s, the British press ran a story with two roles in it, and the casting never changed no matter what the evidence did. Camilla played the predatory older woman who bewitched a weak prince. Diana played the innocent wronged wife. That melodrama sold newspapers at a volume nothing else in Britain could match, and it required editing out a considerable portion of the documented record to keep working. Diana's own extramarital relationships appear in that record, including those with James Hewitt, James Gilby, and Oliver Hoare, and her use of the press functioned as sustained strategy rather than defensive improvisation, running from the secret collaboration with Morton in 1992 through to the Panorama broadcast 3 years later. The binary needed her spotless. None of this converts her into a villain or excuses anything Charles did, though it does dismantle a story that only held together while one woman stayed innocent and the other stayed predatory. Juner and other critical readers of the period argue that Camilla absorbed heavy misogyny from press and public alike, and that the mechanism operated structurally rather than by accident. The monarchy required preservation. Charles occupied the position of constitutional heir and could not be discarded without a crisis far larger than an unhappy marriage, which left the anger generated by the scandal needing somewhere to land that was not the crown itself. An older woman blamed for bewitching a weak prince absorbed it efficiently for most of a decade. Whether she deserved the role is a separate question, from whether the institution needed somebody in it. Tabloid headlines through the mid to late 1990s vilified her routinely as a marriage wrecker, public disapproval ran overwhelmingly high, and the pressure that might have gone to an institution went to one woman instead. By 1994, the strategy inside Charles' household shifted from damage control toward controlled disclosure. ITV broadcast Charles, the private man, the public role on the 29th of June, a documentary built on Jonathan Dimbleby's access, and Dimbleby put the question to him without decoration. Had he tried to remain faithful and honorable within his marriage? Charles opened with an unqualified yes, absolutely, then attached a condition, saying he had tried until the marriage broke down irretrievably, both of them having tried. Listen to the architecture of that answer, but rather than its content. It concedes the adultery, which forms the price of admission to the conversation, and then imports the 1986 chronology from the authorized biography straight onto national television, where the date reaches millions of viewers who will never open a 500-page book. Fidelity gets claimed up to a boundary, and the man claiming the fidelity draws the boundary himself. Dimbleby's biography landed in the same year, carrying the same date, the same portrait of an isolated prince, and the same framing of Camilla as the one person who understood him. Two products, one argument released across a single 12-month window. The heir to the throne did not merely confess adultery in public for the first time in the modern history of the British monarchy. He ran a coordinated media operation to control the terms on which the confession reached the country. Diana answered on the 20th of November, 1995, sitting opposite Martin Bashir on BBC One's Panorama. Asked about her husband's relationship with Camilla, she told the country there had been 3 people in the marriage, which left it a bit crowded, and the line outlived every book any of the 4 biographers ever wrote. 8 words at the core of it, and they closed the argument in the public mind. A sentence that compact travels further than a documented timeline ever will. The institution responded quickly. Late in 1995, Queen Elizabeth II formally requested that the couple divorce, which converted a private catastrophe into a managed administrative process with a paper trail and a timetable. Camilla and Andrew Parker Bowles had finalized their own divorce earlier that year. The decree absolute ending the marriage of Charles and Diana followed on the 28th of August, 1996. On the 31st of August, 1997, Diana died in a high-speed car crash in Paris alongside Dodi Fayed. Britain then produced grief on a scale nobody inside the royal household had planned for, together with media hostility aimed squarely at the people the public held responsible for her unhappiness. Camilla withdrew entirely from public view. No statement, no appearances, and no attempt to argue any version of her side while the country buried a woman it had decided to love without complication. The withdrawal functioned as strategy, and it also constituted the only survivable option available to her. Diana would not age or commit another error of judgment. Every argument Camilla might advance from that point forward ran against the perfected memory of a woman who died at 36. 2 years of silence ended on the 28th of January, 1999, outside the Ritz Hotel in London, where Charles and Camilla left Annabelle Elliott's 50th birthday party together in front of roughly 200 assembled media personnel and walked into the photograph that constituted the entire purpose of the evening. The spontaneity ran to a schedule. ITV News, revisiting the moment 20 years afterward, still referred to it by the operational nickname it carried at the time, Operation Ritz. Behind that evening sat a campaign directed by Deputy Private Secretary Mark Bolland and known inside the household as Operation PB, documented since by both Tom Bauer and Penny Junor. Its objectives read like a project plan rather than a love story. Normalize Camilla's presence within public life, secure acceptance from the media, and build a functioning public relationship between Camilla and the young Princes William and Harry. Look at the pacing. Nearly 2.5 years separate the Ritz photograph from the next milestone, a first public kiss at a National Osteoporosis Society gala at Somerset House on the 26th of June, 2001. A charity event, a photographable moment of affection, a rehabilitation deliverable met roughly on schedule. That interval tells you the speed at which a royal household believed British opinion could be moved without snapping it. The campaign still had not produced an answer to the obvious question. In July 2001, days after the kiss, The Guardian ran a piece headlined with precisely the question the entire operation existed to make askable in polite company. Will they or won't they? Nearly 4 more years passed before anybody answered it, and by then the argument had moved out of public relations and into constitutional law. The announcement of a civil marriage at the Windsor Guildhall triggered an immediate legal fight and not the tabloid sort. Lawyers wrote to the papers. Sir Nicholas Lisle, a former Attorney General, argued alongside other legal scholars that the Marriage Act 1836 specifically exempted members of the royal family from civil marriage procedures, raising the possibility that the union would carry no legal force without fresh primary legislation from Parliament. The Law Society Gazette summarized the situation in February 2005 under a headline that has aged better than most of the coverage from that year, calling the whole business a right royal mess. Nobody in the government found it funny. An heir to the throne whose wedding might not legally exist represented a problem of a different order from an heir with a bad press, and the date had already gone public. Lord Chancellor, Lord Falconer, issued an emergency written statement to Parliament on the 23rd of February, 2005, declaring the wedding lawful. His reasoning proceeded in 2 stages. The Marriage Act, 1949, had repealed and consolidated the 1836 Act without reimposing the civil marriage prohibition on royalty, so the exemption quietly ceased to exist somewhere inside the drafting of a statute nobody wrote with this situation in mind. To put the question beyond doubt, Falconer then invoked the Human Rights Act 1998, arguing that statutory law must be read compatible with Article 12 of the European Convention on Human Rights, the right to marry, and with Article 14, the prohibition of discrimination. Take a moment with that second limb of the argument. The future Supreme Governor of the Church of England received clearance to marry partly on the basis that excluding him would constitute discrimination under European human rights law. Constitutional purists disputed Falconer's reading of the statutes vigorously, scholarly objections filled the law reviews through early 2005, and the arguments never really concluded so much as expired from irrelevance once the ceremony took place. The government held what it needed, and the date survived. The Church presented a separate problem. and the Church could not be argued out of it with a written statement to Parliament. Camilla proposed to remarry during the lifetime of Andrew Parker Bowles, while Charles, a divorced man whose remarriage collided with historic doctrine, would in time inherit the governorship of the Church of England itself. Traditional teaching on divorce blocked a full marriage sacrament. Forcing the point would have opened an ecclesiastical crisis that nobody at Lambeth Palace or Clarence House wanted on their desk. The workaround split the day in two. A civil ceremony would create the marriage in law, and a separate service of prayer and dedication would supply the blessing without the sacrament, which allowed everybody involved to describe the arrangement accurately while describing it differently. A 24-hour postponement moved the date so Charles could attend the funeral of Pope John Paul II in Rome, and the couple married at the Windsor Guildhall on the 9th of April, 2005. The service at St. George's Chapel, Windsor Castle, followed, televised, with Archbishop Rowan Williams presiding and Queen Elizabeth II among the congregation. There, at their own wedding, Charles and Camilla recited the General Confession of Sins from the 1662 Book of Common Prayer and acknowledged their manifold sins and wickedness, which the Church required before it would bless them. 35 years earlier, a set of unwritten aristocratic rules had disqualified Camilla from consideration. The institution finally opened the door and charged a televised act of contrition at the threshold. The 2005 wedding shipped with one further concession, announced by Clarence House at the time. Upon Charles's accession, Camilla would be styled Her Royal Highness, the Princess Consort, not Queen. That announcement carried a defect, and the defect had nothing to do with politics or popularity or the memory of Diana, all of which pointed the same way. Under English common law, the lawful wife of a reigning king becomes Queen Consort automatically, by operation of law, at the instant of his accession. No ceremony confers it, and no household press release withholds it. Removing that status from her would have demanded a formal act of Parliament, drafted, debated, and passed by legislators obliged to explain to their constituents why parliamentary time went on a courtesy title while everything else waited. Royal commentators and historians describe the Princess Consort formulation as an unprecedented fiction, invented as a public relations concession to a country still grieving Diana. The promise purchased a wedding. It could not bind a future accession without legislation nobody ever drafted, which left the household two live options, either legislating against its own interest or allowing the promise to lapse when the moment arrived. The moment got diffused in advance, and by the one person in Britain nobody could argue with. On the 5th of February, 2022, in her Platinum Jubilee Accession Day message, Queen Elizabeth II expressed her sincere wish that Camilla should be known as Queen Consort when the time came. One sentence from the sovereign, released on the anniversary of her own father's death, and 17 years of media contention over a title collapsed almost without resistance. Nobody organized a petition. Charles acceded on the 8th of September, 2022, and Camilla assumed the title that same day. Follow the polling across the whole arc, and a curious shape appears. Tracking by Maury and later YouGov recorded a slow thaw through the 2000s, and the thaw did not move the way a simple story of forgiveness would predict. A majority of the British public came round to the position that Charles and Camilla should be permitted to marry each other, while a persistent majority went on opposing her ever holding the title of Queen. Permission to marry, refusal of the crown, both held by the same electorate for years, apparently without discomfort. The public understood precisely what it was conceding, and precisely what it was not, which is a level of precision opinion polling rarely captures on any subject. By the 2020s, the numbers settled into acceptance, which nobody should confuse with affection. YouGov's first quarter of 2026 royal popularity ratings placed Camilla on 35% positive approval, well below Prince William at 71%, Princess Catherine at 65%, Princess Anne at 61%, and King Charles III at 54%. Separate favorability tracking from the same period records 42% viewing her positively against 45% unfavorably. 3 years after an anointing inside Westminster Abbey, more of the British public views the Queen unfavorably than favorably. The coronation closed the constitutional question with total finality. It closed the public question not at all, and the gap between those two results describes most of what the institution actually achieved between 1970 and 2023. strip the melodrama out, and what remains describes an institution rather than a couple. In 1970, the monarchy operated a set of unwritten marriage rules demanding an aristocratic bride with no printable history, and those rules disqualified the woman Charles suited. In 1981, the identical rules delivered him a wife who satisfied every column of the specification and matched him on almost nothing that sustains a marriage. The rest followed. Track the same 53 years from outside the palace walls, and a second story appears. British attitudes to divorce and remarriage loosened steadily between 1970 and 2023. The country secularized, and the monarchy traveled the same road at roughly the same speed, though it traveled because events pushed it rather than because anyone at the top chose the direction. A hidden affair turned into a public scandal, the scandal turned into a civil marriage, and the civil marriage ended in an anointing at Westminster Abbey. The Constitution proved flexible enough to absorb all of it. A Lord Chancellor located the statutory room for the wedding, the Church of England found a service that blessed without marrying, and common law delivered the title a press release had promised to withhold. Two divorced people, one of them with a living former spouse, ended up crowned inside the national church, and the church that historically forbade the arrangement supplied the oil. Flexibility of that order kept the monarchy constitutionally relevant into the 21st century, which is what institutions do when the alternative is obsolescence. Those rules cost Charles the marriage he wanted, cost Diana the marriage she thought she had signed for, and cost Camilla 3 decades as the most abused woman in Britain. Then the rules changed quietly in exactly the direction anyone paying attention could have identified in 1970. No vote was ever taken. In May 2023, the Church of England crowned her inside Westminster Abbey, and in 2026, the polling still records 45% of the country viewing her unfavorably, which suggests the British public worked out the arithmetic perfectly well and declined, politely and permanently, to sign off on it.